One of the subscribers on my channel, Samaya, recently scored a 333 on her GRE, so well done to her. And I asked her for any feedback on my videos and she said, really helpful. I wish you covered a bit more geometry though. That would have been useful. So that's what I'm going to do today. A drill set focused on geometry. Starting with this question. We have some coordinates here of some triangles and they say, what's the perimeter of quadrilateral ABCD? So how are we going to work out the perimeter? Well, this is the distance between 2 points, and I've done a video on this, but essentially we use Pythagoras. If we look at the horizontal distance across, we can see it goes from 0 to 5, so that's 5 squared, and the vertical height of the triangle is 12, because it goes up to the y-coordinate of 12, so 5 squared plus 12 squared is going to equal the hypotenuse squared. We'll call it c squared. Quickly working that out, we have, it's actually a Pythagorean triple, and I've done another video on that, but it's a 5, 12, 13 triple, so I don't need to work it out. So the hypotenuse is 13, and we have 4 of those for the perimeter, so the overall perimeter will be 13 times 4, which is 52. Now, how are we going to work out the area? I would just do, let's clear this away. To work out the area of this entire shape, I can see there are 4 little triangles, one in each quadrant, and each of them have a base of 5 and a height of 12. 5 times 12 divided by 2 is 30. 30 times 4 is 120. So I would say the area is 120. I think in the real test, the numbers would be a bit closer. But let's move on. More coordinate geometry to come. Okay, in the rectangular coordinate system above, if the area of the triangle is 15, then which of the following are the coordinates of point D? If the area is 15, we get the area by doing base times height divided by 2. We don't know the base, but we know the height. Look at the y-coordinates. Don't look at the x-coordinates. That's the same horizontal point. It's the y-coordinates. The difference between them is going to tell us the height. The difference between -1 and 4 is 5. So that's a height of 5. And yet we know the overall area is 15. So we can set up an equation. X, that's the base, times the height of 5, divided by 2, that's base times height divided by 2, equals 15. Quickly solving that, I would multiply both sides by 2. So 5x equals 30, and so x must equal 6. And if x is 6, what does that make D? What's the coordinates of D? Well, it's the same vertical height as coordinate F. So we know the y-coordinate is going to be -1. And it's 6 to the left of 4, the x-coordinate of 4 at F. If we go 6 to the left of 4, we get to -2. So the coordinate would be -2, -1. Answer B. Moving on. More and more geometry to get you practiced. On the coordinate axes shown above, the graph of y equals 4x plus 20 would cross the x-axis at the point where? To find out where a line crosses the x-axis, make y 0. That's the lesson you can take away from this. You need to instantly realize that the x-intercept, in other words, where it crosses the x-axis, is when y is 0. If we make y 0 in this equation, I'm sure some of you have solved it already, but you could take away 20 from both sides, so 4x equals -20, and divide by 4, so x equals -5. So x would be -5, and the y-coordinate would be 0. Answer A. Okay, more practice. I think there are 15 questions in total. Line segment BC is parallel to the x-axis. That means it's horizontal. Line segment AC is parallel to the y-axis. That means it's vertical. What's coordinate D? Well, like we saw in the previous question, if it's parallel to the x-axis, in other words, if it's a horizontal line, then it's going to have the same y-coordinate. So we know E here. Well, actually, let's do D first. D is directly beneath coordinate A. And are we going to look at the x coordinate or the y coordinate to see it's the same as d? Well, d is the x coordinate. So the x coordinate, the horizontalness, is going to be the same between C and A, meaning that C, coordinate C, is going to begin with a 1 because it must have the same x coordinate as A here, and A has an x coordinate of 1. Okay, E is the y coordinate, so we're thinking about how vertical it is. And if we look at B, we can see it's 1 vertical, looking at its y coordinate. It's 1 up off the ground, so E must be 1. So both quantities are equal. Answer C. Okay, I'm also demonstrating speed here to let you know how to cover these questions quite quickly for the more advanced students. Obviously, if this is quite tough for you, feel free to rewatch, rewind, etc. Anyway, Cam's home is 2 miles east and 3 miles north of Atlanta. So let's say that Atlanta is here. Cam's home is 2 miles east and 3 miles north of Atlanta. It's going to turn out to be a triangle, so let's start it off like that. He drives to town B, which is 3 miles east and 9 miles north of his home. So his home is here, and town B is 3 miles to the east of that and 9 miles to the north. Now you're probably expecting me to say, let's do Pythagoras twice. Well, no need. We can do Pythagoras all in one go. If you think it's 2 miles east from A to C, and then 3 miles east from C to B. So in total, it's 5 miles east. Looking vertically, or how far north it is, it was 3 miles north to get to C, and a further 9 miles north to get to B, which adds up to 12. So overall, it's 12. Do you recognize that Pythagorean triple? It came up in the first question. It's a 5, 12, 13 triangle. So the hypotenuse is 13. In other words, 13 is the shortest distance between B and Atlanta. Obviously, I kind of worked all that out without even checking what the question was. I just knew that's probably what they're going to be asking for, the distance between A and B, which is 13. So quantity B is bigger because it's 17. Okay, a lot of Pythagoras, as you'll notice, in coordinate geometry. This is a good one. AB is one coordinate, we don't know what it is. CD is another, and which quantity is bigger? I would pick numbers here. So A, because it's left of the y-axis, has to be a negative coordinate. So let's say it's like -1. B is above the x-axis, so it's a positive coordinate. Let's say it's 3. Coordinate C is again to the left of the y-axis, so it's going to be a negative. Let's say -1. And D is beneath the x-axis, so that's also going to be negative. Let's say -1. So we've got all the numbers. Now let's work it out. BD, that is 3 times -1, that's -3. And AC, -1 times -1 is 1, which is positive, meaning quantity B is bigger. Now, if they'd both turned out to be negative, I would know the answer is D, because it depends on what numbers you pick. And yes, you can never trust a diagram. If some of you are thinking the numbers I picked are inaccurate, doesn't matter. You can never trust a diagram. Just because C and D look close to the X and Y axis doesn't make a difference. The only thing we know is that they're both negative because which quadrant they're in. And again, if both of these quantities have been positive, I'd have picked D because we don't know the actual amounts. I'm just making up numbers. But it turns out one of them is negative, quantity A, one of them is positive, quantity B, so we do know which is bigger. That's the positive one. Next question. Which of the following is the graph of the equation y equals negative the absolute value of negative x? Okay, these questions are getting a bit harder now. The key thing to realize here is that no matter what value of x I have inside the absolute bracket, and no matter the fact that I'm timesing it by a negative, all of that is irrelevant because the absolute value brackets that you can see here and here will turn it to be positive. You could input any value of x, -2, +5, -1,000,000, +0.5, it doesn't matter. You times it by a negative inside the absolute, and the sign switches. If it was positive, it now becomes negative, but all of that doesn't matter because it's inside an absolute value bracket. And an absolute value bracket makes something positive. So the bracket becomes positive, but we have this final negative on the outside. And negative times the bracket, which definitely has to be positive, negative times positive is negative. So we know y has to be negative in all scenarios. Y has to be completely negative. And which of these graphs have y being completely negative? Well, it's the last three. Notice in the last three graphs, y is always negative. It never gets above 0 in the y direction, in the vertical direction. For each of these graphs, it always stays negative. So we know it has to be C, D, or E because of the logic we used earlier to prove that y was negative. The question is, which one? Answer D, that you can see here, is saying that somehow x can't be positive. Answer E is saying that somehow x can't be negative. But I think the answer is C. The reason being is there's no limitations on x. X could be a positive number. X could be a negative number. It doesn't matter. The whole graph has to end up being negative. So there's no restrictions on x. There's just a restriction on y. So that's why I think it's graph C. Some students for this question would have plotted it out by picking numbers. That's fine too. But through logic, we can work out that it must be graph C. Anyway, let's move on. Points A, B, and C, D not shown in the figure above are in quadrants 1 and 3 respectively. So A, B is up here somewhere. That's quadrant 1. And C, D is in quadrant 3 down here. If A, B, C, D does not equal 0, that just means that none of the coordinates are 0. Then the point that must be in which quadrant? Can you guess my approach? That's right, we pick numbers. Let's say A is 2, B is 3, C, because it's down here, would have to be negative, so let's say negative 2, and D would also have to be negative, so let's say negative 3. Now filling in those numbers, we have negative B, which is 3, times D, which was negative 3. Okay, so that's negative BD. That's the first coordinate, which you can tell is going to be 9, positive 9. And then the next one is BC. B is 3, and C is negative 2. And what is 3 times negative 2? That is, a lot of brackets here, I know, but hopefully that makes sense. That's the x coordinate, that's the y coordinate. Anyway, 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. And now test yourself. Which quadrant is the coordinate 9, negative 6 going to be in? Well, 9's positive, so starting at the origin, that goes to the right, and minus 6 is negative, so down here. So it's going to be in quadrant 4. Answer D. Awesome. Next one. Which of the following pairs of coordinates corresponds to a point in the shaded region? Well, we know the x-coordinate has to be positive because it's on the right-hand side of the coordinate set, and the y-coordinate has to be negative because it's beneath the x-axis. So I'm looking for an x-coordinate being positive, which is this one, and this one. And I'm looking for a y-coordinate to be negative, which is the first one and also the fourth one. So the question is, which one of those two? And that's where we take a look at the coordinate here, minus 10, 10. That says to me that the coordinates along this line are going to be the same number. For example, minus 9, 9. How do I know that? Because I know it goes through minus 10, 10, and also the origin, which is 0, 0. So it's also going to go through points like 5, minus 5, or 9, minus 9. But there's one more thing I want you to notice. The shaded part of the graph is above the line. The line, let me draw it in a different color. The line goes from top left down here, and the shaded part is above that line. And this is really important. Even my best students often get this wrong. If it's above that line, the shaded part, it means the y-coordinate must be higher. So it must be something, not 9 minus 9, that would be on the line. It must be something like A, 9 minus 7, which fits because the y-coordinate is slightly higher than we'd expect on the line, which means it's above that line. Many of you will be saying, well, why not D? What's wrong with D? Well, D starts off with the coordinate 7, which would be here somewhere, wherever, it doesn't matter. And then if it ended with -7, then we know it would be on that line. Fine, it will be somewhere here, the coordinate 7, -7. But then instead of going above that to like -6 here for the y coordinate or -5, it goes further down to -9, meaning it's beneath the line, somewhere around here. But we wanted the shaded region for our point, so it has to be above the line. So the y coordinate has to go up, which is what happens with A. That was actually quite a tough one, good one to do. Now at this point, I wanted it to be a quicker drill practice, so this one looks a bit simple. I'm just going to go for any interesting ones. This one looks okay. The equation of a line is given by that. Okay, we'll quickly do this one, and 14. Yeah, we'll do this one. Okay, we'll finish off the last 3, and we'll see how we go, because I want to give you a fairly quick drill round. The equation of the line graphed on the coordinate system above is given by that. How do we find A? A, remember, is the y-intercept. How do you find the y-intercept? You make x 0. We talked about this earlier. If x is 0, the fraction cancels and we get 8. So we know that is 8 up. How do we get B? B is where it crosses the x-axis, meaning it's the x-intercept, meaning it's when y is 0. If y is 0, we can quickly solve that equation. What I would do is I would push the negative fraction to the other side by adding -13/12x to both sides. If we do that, the 13/12 becomes positive. It's now on the left, and then it equals 8. I would times both sides by 12, so 13x equals, what is that, 96, and then divide by 13. Now, I'm not sure if that goes in. Obviously, we could use a calculator, but approximately, I would say 7. 7 would be 91, so 7.2-ish. Doesn't really matter to be too accurate. So 7.2. Now, what's the question? AO. AO, that's the distance between O and A, so that's 8. And BO, that's 7.2. So quantity A is slightly bigger. Okay, moving rapidly on. What is the value of x in the rectangular coordinate system? Well, this is an interesting one. So the way I would do this is, like in a previous question, the ratio has to be balanced. Do you remember that question where it was -10, 10, and it went through 0, 0? So the same thing applies here, where to get from 0 to 4, 5, the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate were in the ratio 4 to 5. To get from 0 to 4 and from 0 to 5, we went across by 4 and up by 5. Now, to be on that same line, this other coordinate has to be in that same ratio. Except we know the y-coordinate already. We know it's 1.5. So, how do we find the x-coordinate, that missing x value? Well, I would get my calculator, and here it is, and I would do 5 divided by 1.5. That is 3.33. So I would do 4 divided by 3.33. 4 divided by 3.333 is 1.2. Now, I know I went quick on that, but is there another way of doing it? I guess you could, if that was a bit complicated, I just divided on the right-hand side. How do I get from 5 to 1.5? You divide by 3.3, turns out. So I did the same thing on the left. What you might want to do, another way of finishing off that ratio to find out what it is you could divide both sides by 5 to get it down to 1. So that would be 0.8 to 1, and then scale it up. We need the right-hand side to be 1.5. So how do we go from 1 to 1.5? We times by 1.5. And so we times the left by 1.5, and that gets you 1.2. So different ways of solving it. To get from 0, 0 to 4, 5, we go across 4 and up 5. So that's the ratio you want to maintain for the missing coordinate. So answer B. And finally, let's do question 15. By the way, you can assume all of these are right, and there will be a cross if any of them are wrong, and I'll explain it at the end. Okay, it's an opportunity to practice the same thing. So we have A minus 3, 2, and B is mn. Now this is very similar actually to the previous question about ratios. We've gone from A to O, that's the origin, and now we need to go from O to B. Well, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm just going to go even slower to make it clearer. To get from A to O, we went across by 3, didn't we? Because it was minus 3 and now we're at 0. And then we went down by 2 because the y coordinate is 2. To get from 2 to 0, you go down by 2. So we went to the right by 3 and down by 2. Let's just do that same ratio again. So if we go across by 3, we will now be at positive 3. And then down by 2, same ratio, will be at negative 2. So the coordinate will be 3, negative 2. That's m and n. And now what's the question? Minus m. So that's minus 3, because we know m is 3, and n is minus 2. Which of those two quantities is bigger? It's actually quantity B, because minus 2 is bigger than minus 3. It's more positive. So the answer is B. That was a lot of questions in quite a short amount of time. I think we did 10, 12 questions. So if you like this kind of rapid fire drill set, especially for geometry, let me know and I'll do loads more. See you in the next one.